Good morning, everyone. I'm here to share with you all my experience of working with spouses of persons with motor neuron disease. Title of today's presentation is Gendered Meaning Making of Caregiving Among Spouses of Persons with ALS and its implications for care. About the study, it is an in-depth exploration into the lives of spouses of persons with ALS who were settled in Bangalore and were receiving treatment from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. The current paper looks at participants' experience from a gendered lens. Why do we require this study? As we all know, a diagnosis of terminal illness often becomes a point in a family's life, after which life would never be the same. There is a huge body of literature in caregiving which identifies the difference among males and females in their roles. Gender, as a social construct, has played a major role in determining the societal expectations from the spouse caregivers. People who live through and make sense of this experience of their journey as caregivers of chronically ill partners is influenced by the societal gender norms. There are theories like gender role socialization framework, gender role expectations framework, which emphasize on the gender differences in caregiving outcome variables. The health outcomes of the informal caregivers can be enhanced by gender conscious approach. The spouses of persons with motor neuron disease might have unique experience of this life-limiting devastating illness. The personal identity, expectations about their life, their marriage, the future are often challenged with their partner's illness progression. Though there are literature on spouse caregivers of persons with ALS, the specific dimension of gender into caregiving is not much explored. Hence, the current study aimed at exploring how gender influences lived experience of spouses of persons with ALS and to understand the meaning the spouses gives to their experiences. Let us look at how the study was conducted. For the study, people who were receiving treatment either as an outpatient or inpatient from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, and their spouses were recruited. The first phase of the study was conducted at home, wherein the participants' experiences from symptom onset till diagnosis and as well as the post diagnosis was captured. 3 months later, the first phase, the second phase was conducted. Even that was at a home of the participants, wherein what were the changes in their lives with the illness progression was captured. After that, the third phase of the study was conducted, again 2 months later, the second. For the study, we followed an exploratory research design with a qualitative methodology, and within the qualitative methodology, interpretative phenomenological analysis was used. Sampling was purposefully done, and there were representations from different socioeconomic group as well as socio-religious backgrounds. The specific instruments which were used for data collection were semi-structured interview guide, live grid, home visit, observation, and depression, anxiety, and stress scale. The 3-point interviews with each participant lasted somewhere between 45 minutes to 1.5 hours, and that spanned across 5 months. The information gathered through LifeGrid and the reflexive diary of the researcher was used as additional guide for interpretation of the findings. Altogether, there were 13 participants in this 3-point interview. To make sense of the data which we collected, we used interpretative phenomenological analysis. The steps for IPA is as follows. First, we got familiarized with the data, and then the exploratory comments were made. From the exploratory comments, the emergent themes were derived. Once that was done, we looked for connections across the themes, after which we moved on to the next case. Likewise, we looked for pattern across the cases. Through our analysis, we were able to identify the essence of lived experience of spouse caregivers, and it was understood as akin to a voyage. Prevalence of ALS, as we all know, it's more among males than females, and that is reflected in our current study as well. Hence, the female participants to males were in the ratio of 8 to 5. The essence of the phenomena from a gender perspective where the gender influences the expression of emotion, association between gender and age to caregiving decisions, sociocultural influences of gender in caregiving. These were the socioeconomic or socio-demographic profile of the respondents and the illness status of the persons with ALS. The major findings, as described earlier, the gender perspectives in the meaning making had gender influences in the expression of emotion, association between age and gender to caregiving decision, and the socio-cultural influences of gender in caregiving, in which it had the sub-themes of socio-cultural expectations related to gender and women's experience tagged with husbands. Let us look at it in detail. How did gender influence the expression of emotion? Many of the participants were observed to have this as a major criteria in their mind. Like when they were feeling their emotions, participants, especially men, were not very comfortable to express their distress and they pretended to be very strong. They imagined that they are never supposed to express their actual distress. That was very evident in the verbatim given below. It was also found that there is an association between age and gender to the caregiving decisions. Participants, especially the women participants, experienced their status as spouse and being younger in the family of procreation influenced their role in decision making about caregiving. And there were many socio-cultural influences of gender in caregiving. There were specific expectations from a woman, like to tolerate the physical, emotional, and verbal abuse from the partners, which is very prevalent in Indian society, and that is seen in the current study as well. Some of them were to tolerate the anger and abuse from their ill partners, especially when their physical struggles aggravated due to the progression of symptoms. Some of the women in the study felt that their existence is tagged along with that of their husband. As she is aware of the possible prognosis, she no more has hopes and dreams about her lives. She considers her life to be over when her husband is in the end stage. Her worries are often for their children, their future. With the death of a person, when the spouse is a woman, along with the loss of that person, she is also losing a social security, social status as well. There will be a drastic change in her life and she never feel that safety. So this was evident, especially among the participants who lost their partners during the study period. Though there were not many participants who lost their partners during the study period, the themes which derived out of their experiences were very significant, and hence we decided to include that as well in our finding. Once these themes were emerged, once this understanding of their meaning from their experiences were culled out, we were able to develop guidelines for the spouse caregivers who are engaged in home based care. And the guidelines had two parts. One was for the healthcare professionals to prepare the spouses to care for the persons with ALS, and the second part of the guidelines was about healthcare professionals to ensure the spouse caregivers' well being. Like in any other research study, the current study is also having some limitations as well as strengths. The strengths are as follows. It throws light on the issues specific to MND illness trajectory. It used a qualitative design and a qualitative exploratory inquiry to understand distinctive experiences of spouse caregivers. It followed true hermeneutic ideographic principles of phenomenology. The credibility, transferability, confirmability, and dependability were ensured. Among the participants, there was representation from various socioeconomic group within Bangalore. The highlight of the study was that all the interviews took place in home context in their naturalistic environment. It has the following limitations as well. We do acknowledge these. The sample size, which focused on the idiographic understanding, calls for caution in attempts to generalize the study findings. Participants of the current study were represented only from urban Bangalore. Homogeneity was compromised in the purview of methodology. Due to the pragmatic aspects of the research process, the 3-point interviews were designed for a span of 5 months. Having said this, we would like to place on record that the exploration of the gender influences on the lived experiences of spouse caregivers of ALS really helped us in getting a different perspective to their lives. This research work will get its culmination by strategizing gender conscious approach in developing interventions for informal caregivers of ALS and other life limiting conditions. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions to start out? Anything online? So I wasn't sure if I got it. Were all the caregivers then female?
May I?
Yeah.
It was a mixed group, as I mentioned in the study. There were 5 female caregivers and 8 female caregivers and 5 male caregivers.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very quiet room this morning. First presentation. How about, was there any, with some of the studies you were doing, did you look at cognitive impact, cognition?
Cognition element I have not looked at. I was looking at the larger lived experience of the spouses. Gendered caregiving was just one side of the study, one aspect of the study. The larger study was looking at the lived experience as like a totality of it.
And were they all male, female?
Yes.
Oh, there is a question in the back.
Hi, so I saw that slide where you had the 2 different tracks for training, essentially, caregivers. I'm wondering, where that curriculum came from and what the success looked like with those different training models.
Thank you so much for that question. We are yet to try out that model among the caregivers because we just got that published recently, very recently, maybe a few months back. It got published, and we are yet to try out with the caregivers, as in in a very formal manner. So I may not be able to comment on the efficacy of that model yet. It is just developed as a guideline. Maybe we will have to try out doing it as like an intervention per se, to check out for the efficacy.
Yes, and then you can present on it next year.
Definitely, hopefully. Thank you.
There is a question online.
Yes, so this is from Stephanie. I'm wondering how spouses, specifically wives, can be supported after their husband's passing, both financially, socially, and emotionally.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I can share what we have done with these participants. As I've mentioned, 5 of the participants lost their spouses during the study period, and among them, 4 of them were females. Who lost their partners, and among those four female participants, one was belonging to a very poor socioeconomic strata. And what we did after the patient with ALS passed away was she was to the extent that she was not even able to feed for her children, and her children was in grade 12 and one was entering college. So they were thinking of, again, this gender dimension comes in India. I mean, wherever we say, like the elder son who was into college, he was allowed to go for college, and she managed somehow to pool money for his education, whereas girl child who was in her 12th grade was in the verge of stopping her education because she was not able to finance for her studies. So what we did was, like, we as a team met with this CSR group, and we pulled out some money for her to continue her education, and we were able to raise about 28,000 rupees for that family, with which it was the initial what do you say, admission fee for her daughter to join the school, grade 12th. So that was one thing. Along with that, we continued to provide her support, and she was actually she joined as a homemaid, in the sense she was taking care of an elderly person, and she joined for work. And her son, currently, it has been 2 years since I completed the study. Her son currently completed his studies, and he's actually, he got placement in a company as well. So they are kind of stable as of now. That is one case which I can tell you from the study which I've done. The other spouse who lost her husband, they had, as I mentioned, 3 others were there. They had enough of family support, so I was not able to help them much. But this was one case where we could do something.
Wow.
Thank you.
So there's another question from Amy. Can you summarize some of the differences between the gender's depression scales and other measures?
Which scale? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that properly.
Depression scale? Was that what you said?
Depression
Yes.
scale?
Yes.
I have used only depression, anxiety, and stress scale among the participants, as it was a pure qualitative study. I didn't use any other scale, but just DAS, depression, anxiety, and stress scale, just to know whether if they require any sort of psychosocial support. And among the study results of DAS were not very significant, except one participant who had a depression score of 11, which was at the verge of, like, a minor depression. But then it was soon after his spouse. Soon after his spouse death, so it was not very sustaining kind of thing. It was just like a grief reaction, and though I suggested him to go for a referral soon after that, but he said that he would like to take some more time, a thought about taking a professional help. So that was a one finding. That's all. No other scales were used. Thank you.